Hello, everyone. Our next guest is Marlon Ramirez. He's got an impressive resume. He co founded an airline in Brazil with the founder of JetBlue, David Neeleman. Who does this at 28 years old? It's an amazing story because there's a lot of similarities to running a trucking company. So it's very interesting to have him on. Today, he runs a VC called Blue Impact Supply Chain, and I'm glad to be part of that as well. So let's listen to Marlon and see what he has to say, and we could learn a lot. Thanks, y'all. Fives. Good morning, Marlon. Thank you for joining me today. How are you doing in Florida?
Good morning, Tristan. Thanks for having me. All good in Florida. Nice and sunny like always.
Like California, except it's not humid.
Yeah, I know. We get
Well,
humid.
well, dude, you've done a lot of cool things, man. You've co-founded six companies. You went to Brown University with an economics and international relations degree. You speak three languages fluently: Spanish, English, and Portuguese. Um, Dude, your work experience with companies like Pfizer, UBS Investments, what is it? JetBlue, Azul Airline, and Azul Cargo. Why aren't you bald? Just kidding. No, I'm just kidding.
Genetics. Genetics help a lot, right? When-
No, I was just, so what excites you today? That's an amazing resume you've built in the last 20 plus years. And so what are you most excited about today?
the times that we're living are very particular. I think with all the shocks to the system that we're seeing, it's tariffs, it's geopolitics, it's AI. That presents a great opportunity for who is able to navigate the landscape. So that's what excites me. I think there's a lot of opportunity when there's a lot of chaos.
I mean, you definitely know how to handle money. And I could only imagine what it's like to handle a billion plus. And that's what I want to go back to your history of starting an airline in Brazil. How is it playing with someone else's money? And 200 million of it, I think it was, you started raising. So what's that like? And yeah, playing with money. Tell me the responsibilities.
I mean, it's huge, right? It's not your capital. I was young at the time. I was 28 years old when I co-founded the airline. Uh, how did we get there, right? I mean, because I mean, it's not you just don't o- walk into an investor's office one day and say like, "Hey, I'm gonna raise 235 million and start an airline." There's a build-up process, right? And so, for me, it started when I was at UBS and we covered the JetBlue IPO, and I just fell in love with the JetBlue story of JetBlue going up against Delta and winning New York. And I was like, this was my first job out of college, and I was like, how does that happen? Like, how do you start an airline and win? It's like, and it's so hard. It's like one of the most complex businesses you could build. And so instead of being a banker, I was like, I really want to learn how that works. Like, how do you build something like that? And so I went to JetBlue. And people say, "Oh, you really make money in airlines," and it's really difficult to make money in airlines. Don't get me wrong. When you look, I think it's one of the most difficult businesses to make money in, just because we could talk a little bit about why that is. So, but I want to learn how to run a complex business. So I went to JetBlue and got my got deep into the operation, had the opportunity to start working together with the founder David Neeleman and helping him with his new business ideas. And ultimately the new idea became start a brand new airline. And so David invited me to be part of the founding team of Azul. And so we were carrying his track record, right? So the we were he had already started a few airlines, so we're part of the team of building this next airline. So we had this gravitas going into the market that was carried by previous experience, right? And so investors look for that. They're like, okay, what's the experience? How can you pull this off? And so they're looking at that track record. So we were riding the coattails of JetBlue and David's experience. And so That's what allowed for us to be audacious in the capital amount that we asked for. So at the time, this was the largest equity raise in airline history, $235 million to get Azul off the ground.
Wow. And did you speak Portuguese back then?
Yes,
Or did you
so
learn? Yeah,
it's
tell me about it because it seems like you have financial fluency, right? And so does it, and also now language fluency.
yeah.
What was that like? I
I mean, it comes back to my to my Genesis story, right? Which is I was born in Colombia, I was raised in New York, and I had this burning question growing up, which was like, why is New York, the US, so hyper developed, and why is Colombia, LATAM so underdeveloped, Southeast Asia so underdeveloped? And I was like, it was like mind boggling. Obviously, there's many reasons for that. But that was a question I seeked an answer to. And that's why I ended up studying what I studied in college. I was like, and having, I needed to have that question answered. And so in college, I was like, look, I want to understand how economic development works. I want to understand how Latin America could benefit from economic development. But when you look at LATAM, you're like Brazil is like this massive country and they don't speak Spanish. They speak Portuguese. So I was like, I need to learn Portuguese in order if I want to do something with LATAM. So I started studying Portuguese when I was 18 at Brown, and it was an intense Portuguese course for a couple of years, and it culminated in studying abroad in Rio, in when I was in my junior year. So that's how I picked up a lot of the basics of Portuguese, and being in the country, making friends. And I never thought I was going to go full circle live in Brazil for work. So one day we're sitting in David's house, and David is like, "Look, we're starting this airline. We didn't have a name for it yet, and so we're going around around the room in his house, and you're like, okay, so who speaks Portuguese?" And coincidentally, the founding team, we all had this nexus with Portuguese, and I was like, yeah, I'm fluent. I've lived in Brazil, and because David speaks Portuguese too, and and so, but out of the gringos, I actually spoke the best Portuguese because it helped that I spoke Spanish as well. I had this base. So, being the youngest founder of Azul, I was just, and knowing and being fluent in Portuguese, I was just giving boatloads of responsibility, including literally flying into Brasilia to submit the application for the airline. Like, and then everybody was like, well, Martin, look, you're going into Brasilia. You should probably go with lawyers just to make sure, So I'm like, they're flying into Brasilia with lawyers to submit the application for the airline. It's like, so anyway, it helped a lot having this Portuguese background.
So when taking the class at 18, the 18-year-old Marlon at Brown University. By the way, I actually did research on Brown, and I said, "Wow, they have a 5.2% acceptance rate." And to study international relations and economics, I'm like, that's insane. Like, did you even think that you were going to be starting an airline? Like,
No,
that
no,
Portuguese was going to come in, and when you're like international relations, because it seems like it all just lined up perfectly. Is that
it-
something you even thought about?
it's funny when you look back. It almost
Yeah.
seems like it was purposeful that it was that the build up, but at the time I had no idea. Like I really, for me, it was a kind of just following, again, trying to answer that question. Like, why is the US so hyper developed and LATAM not? And so that's literally what led, that's the question that led me to build everything that I built from learning Portuguese to studying what I studied. So I got the theory in college, and then when I was fortunate to end up getting to UBS in Wall Street, and there I started to we covered the transportation logistics group. So that's where I came to see that as this the backbone for economic development. So it was really more about the question, right? Yeah, finding answers to that question, and that kind of that transcended. If there's one line that transcends the trajectory, is that curiosity of getting answers to that question. And so when I started in Wall Street, I kind of things solidified in my mind. I was like, wow, supply chain, logistics, transportation, that is the backbone of economic development. that's the base layer. Without that, you don't have any, you can't build upon it, right? You can't build a banking system on a country that doesn't have infrastructure, supply chain, logistics. And it goes back to humanity's first trade. We're doing barter and trade. That's how we all started, right? So it's the exchange of goods on top of infrastructure. Once you build a road, oh wow, you could do even more. You build a bridge, oh wow, you could do even more. And so it's like that is the backbone of economic development. So for me, it was like when I got that real world experience, I was like, I didn't look back. I was like, this is amazing. I could have my hand in helping in economic development, be it here, be it in Latin, wherever, by being involved in this industry. And so for me, having, being at the right place at the right time, helping David at JetBlue with his new business idea initiatives, and then being able to say like, hey, Marlon, be part of this and help start a airline in Latin America. It's like I went full circle. I was like, wow, we built one of the largest airlines in Latin America. So I had my hand in helping the economic development of Latin America because airlines themselves, here's a dirty little secret, they really don't make money. It's hard to make money. And so,
Oh
but
wait, it's like trucking, like owning
it's
assets.
all the hard work, man. It's like trucking, like airlines. It's like you're doing a lot of work, but you know what? Who's benefiting? The economy's benefiting. The amount of jobs that you create, the amount of the trade lanes that you create for people to do commerce, for people to do business, it's like it's like the biggest type of nonprofit work you could do in a for-profit manner, right? So because
Shoot,
you're
like
still
that.
working for the profit, you're doing everything you can to generate that profit, but the benefits to society and the economy outweigh what the airline's actually doing for itself. So I have a very soft spot in my heart for the work that airlines do, because the benefits are gigantic. So that is the that is how that I feel very fulfilled about having that experience and having today being able to say, look, I helped in LATAM's economic development because we built that airline.
Well, because I know what you're doing today, and we'll get into that later. But I want to get more into the competitive environment because this show is called Race to the Bottom, by the way. Well, and I want to get into that. I love that I didn't even have to say anything. You literally talked about the complexity and the nonprofit. I always make jokes all the time. I run a nonprofit, trucking company. So except if you're a broker, right? But if you think about it, like your industry, it's very, very competitive. And so like how did you personally, like the Marlin, you're running this, you're in charge of 200 plus million dollars of startup money. You're in a country that you don't know. How do you keep your values together in a competitive environment like the airline industry where you know that you're not going to make any money, but did you have to cut corners at times to make it work? Like, what was that like?
I mean, it's very tempting to cut corners, especially in a country in the developing world, right, where it's known that people cut corners, right? So we didn't want to cut corners because we obviously we have this American mentality, and we know that eventually comes back to bite it, right? So we want to do things the right way. We're very fortunate to end up with investors that uh, heavy investors in Brazil that basically helped us remove that problem, right? Because they were involved in Embraer, the largest Embraer is one of the largest aircraft manufacturers, and they're Brazilian. And so we had investors that were tied to Embraer that also wanted to see this happen. We were breaking a duopoly. It was right. It was only Gol and Tam that were operating really high airline prices. So we're breaking duopoly. We're doing something great for the country, flying Brazilian airplanes. So it's like the story, the political story of what we were doing, just kind of made us uh, the made us the darling for Brazil because we were doing just uh, massive positive impact for the country, flying Brazilian planes, breaking duopoly, bringing air prices down. So that's what allowed for us to not have to cut corners, right?
Wow.
Now, air, airlines themselves, the operating, flying passengers around, it's very difficult to make money just doing that. You have to build other businesses around the airline. So airlines are actually an ecosystem of businesses. And that's really what you're able to capitalize on to be competitive, right? So if you go with the mentality of you're just going to build an airline flying from point A to point B, good luck. There's a whole cemetery of those entrepreneurs around, right? It's like you got to build more. You got to really tap into what the value that the airline is bringing to the economies, the cities where they're operating. And the way to do that is by doing more. You have to do car rentals, hotel rentals, vacation packaging. You got to do cargo. You got to have insurance. You got to have co-branded credit cards. You have to have what you see with the airlines, they charge for special seating, you have to pay a little premium for that. So you have to add all of these other strategies around in order, if you're lucky, drive a couple of percentage points in profit. It's like
Wow.
that is the reality of the airline business. So look, people ask me, well, why didn't you continue building airlines with David? And I was like, look, this was great. I had my experience. I had my hand in helping in economic development. And I was a company builder. I was building all these businesses around, but it also gave me the lens because I was a company builder inside of the airline. It also gave me the lens of, well, what are healthier businesses, right? And Azul Cargo was a wild success. Why was it a wild success? Because we treated Azul Cargo as its kind of its own business, right? We took a model instead of just selling the belly space of the aircraft to DHL or FedEx. They wanted to just simply just buy it out and use our space. And we're like, no, we want to monetize this as a real business. At least that was the argument that I took to the table. And I was like, we could make a real business out of this. So why don't we become our own FedEx and do parcel packaging? And instead of making, call it 50 cents a pound, we could make $1, $2 a pound, call it, on the space that we operate in. And so we were able to do that because we
Wow.
thought about it like a business, right? And then when you look at the margins, you're like, hey, this is a healthier business. And then when I did some soul searching of like, well, why am I here? Again, it comes back to the development story, barter and trade, economic development. And so instead of building another passenger airline, it's like, why don't we build an integrator that builds roadways in the sky focused on cargo, focused on a supply chain? So that's how I co-founded another company called Modern Logistics. We had freighter aircraft, so we did have an airline, but we were now a logistics integrator.
Yeah.
We were selling to large multinationals like Samsung, folks that require speed and delivery and high quality. So really electronics, pharmaceutical, and we're doing that with warehouses, aircraft, freighter aircraft, technology going for B2B operations, uh, armored operations.
I, it's insane because like now I think about trucking, right? You said a lot of nuggets in that whole segment right now. Everyone thinks they could buy a truck and go A to B, make money, right? That's really not because being on the brokerage side, like what you're talking about is building vertically.
Yeah,
You had things around it, and you mentioned insurance as part of the other ways to make
yeah,
money, and now cargo, and then the logistics side, and a lot of just like in transportation, as you know, everyone wants, oh, I want that DHL account, I want that FedEx or UPS, thinking that that's going to that volume is going to help them make more margins, when in fact, I guess price elasticity, it's that if even if it's so sensitive to price that if you lower your price, so is the next guy and the next guy and next guy, and it doesn't,
race to
the
the
demand
bottom.
has, yeah, the demand has nothing to do with it. It's just like everyone's just going down to the bottom, and like you're just like, no, forget that. Let's get Samsung. Let's get electronics or pharmaceuticals, right? And which is funny because you did some internship at Pfizer, which like you have like all so many things that aligned. I mean, it was almost made for you to run companies, and like going back to that now, 6 companies that you founded, and you've done a lot of CFO work. So I know you know your math and you have financial fluency. So, and you've started, you've probably made 6 business plans. Do they always go as planned?
You know, business plans never go as planned. What it does, it's your north star, right?
Oh, I like that. North
Plan
Star.
is your north star because you have to know what you're getting into. So so mathematically, things need to make sense, right? So like when we're putting together, we're putting together Azul's business plan, we needed to know that mathematically we could compete and we could, based on the planes that we're flying, based on the cities that we're choosing to fly, based on demand. So the math has to work out in your business plan. Now, once you put that into operation, well, that's another story, right? Because then you start to see that in real life. Like, what the incumbents in Brazil did to us when we started flying, and we kind of knew there was going to be retaliation, right? So we set up a flight, call it, Sao Paulo to Salvador, call it, 9 a.m. You know what the competition does? They do the sandwich. You know what that is?
What?
They
No,
start
no, no.
flying. They start flying right before you at right before you fly. Like half an hour before your flight, or half an hour after your flight. Bring prices down so they could kill that flight. So the only way that you could compete, knowing that the airlines are going to just try to kill you because they want you to like not survive that initial period, and they're starting to place flights like in a sandwich so they could squeeze your prices down, right? The only way that you could retaliate is to be able to actually go all in. You got to have a lot of volume of flights. So for them, it becomes hard to start trying to just get, it's just become difficult if they have to do like a network type retaliation as opposed to just a few flight retaliation. So that is that is one of the, and that's where you need capital, right? Because
Yeah.
even though you have your plan, didn't account for that because you didn't know how the retaliation was going to look like. So the initial cash burn was actually bigger, right, than
Wow.
we set out to be, right? Um, and then so it's like playing chess, right? And airlines is like playing chess, man. It's like three dimensional.
Whew. It's
It's like
mind blowing.
so let me tell you, let me tell you what saved us, right? Because instead of being, oh my God, we're burning a lot of cash and the airlines are out to get us and we're gonna die, right? Because we're they have massive networks, they have the gravitas in the market. And so we're like, no, we kind of have to trump them. Like, how can we actually now play offense, right? And so one of the issues that we're having in the airport, which is like the interior of Sao Paulo airport, it's called Campinas. And by the way, the interior of Sao Paulo is bigger than the whole country of Chile, economically speaking. Just so you get a sense of how
Wow.
big just Sao Paulo is within Brazil, right? And so we're like, look, we really got to make this interior of Sao Paulo work, but we weren't getting enough volume of people going to the airport. We're like, what's going on? We ran the math. The math makes sense. We should be getting more people flying, but they're not coming. And then we're like walking around the airport, like, damn, there's no parking. Damn, there's no buses coming to the airport. There's no trains coming to the airport. So people just didn't have the infrastructure to get to the airport. Like we had great prices, but Brazil and other developing islands, they just don't have infrastructure. So we're like, we're gonna have to put infrastructure in place. So one of the first initiatives that I had was build a bus network. We literally built a bus network that we gave away for free. We're like, look, when you buy your flight, you're getting a bus ticket with you, and it's leaving your city. Like the city there's smaller cities around the Campinas airport called like Sorocaba, Piracicaba, uh, you know, and so we put buses all around, bringing in people, and then we started to feel planes, and we're like, oh man, this is great. We're starting to get volume. The competition's not doing that, So there's like, wow, this is our offense. The is our offense. Like this is what we're going to do to stimulate the volume that we ran in the math in our business plan, but the buses were not in our business plan. so now we have this bus network bringing people volumes of people, and we're like, this is really working out for us. Now we're gonna go straight to the competition. We put buses in their airports in the city of Sao Paulo. We had buses in Congonhas Airport, which is like right in the middle of the city of Sao Paulo. We put it in it, like two other places inside of Sao Paulo. And then we started extracting their passengers that were all of a sudden, wait, I got to spend like 2 hours in traffic to get to international airport of Guarulhos. I could spend 2 hours. I don't have to pay for a bus. It's longer distance, but I don't hit the traffic. So I'll go to Campinas. Why not? So anyway, long story. I can go
Dude,
on airlines forever,
I
but it shows you how things do not go as planned.
dude, I love that because you've done like pure business plays, right? Like the smart way of doing business or the more responsible way versus like you pivoted first of all. And then the second thing is like the I love every founder that I can talk to is the ability to focus on the customer, like being obsessed with the customer, right? Like that infrastructure to create a bus to get them coming. Like you're making it so much easier for them. Meanwhile, your competition is focusing on the competition, which is you. And it's wild because it's like I'm actually seeing it in play. And this was you were in your late 20s, man. That's freaking crazy to have that type of mentality at that age. Did you ever have like imposter syndrome, or did you know you were that much smarter? Actually, let me ask you this. Did you actually really know that Brown University had like you had to be in the top 5% to get into that school?
I knew it was very tough to get it.
Okay.
And when I was there, you're just talking to geniuses, right? Like, I mean, so you definitely feel like an imposter, right? Especially my background, being an immigrant and, you know, feeling like I'm just like, damn, I'm here by chance, right? So that kind of gets to you, right? And but then when you start to be in the business world and then you start to see some other people and their ideas and what they're thinking and the way that they're positioning, you start to see a lot of you start to see through the BS.
I
There's
knew
so much
it.
politics in place. There's so much people that are just don't have the depth of, and so I'm like, wait a minute. He's like, two levels up. He's getting paid like two, three times as much, and I'm like, but I'm not. I'm not inferior to that person. Actually, a lot of the stuff they say, like I've said, they're not listening to me because I'm younger or like I'm Latino or whatever, and I'm like, but so it ended up it ended up, I ended up in a situation where I was like, you know what? I'm not an imposter. I'm based on my ideas and based on the way that I'm executing, I'm actually at that level or even at a higher level because I have grit, like I'm like, I don't give up. Right. And some people that haven't been through a life that has challenges, an easier life, sometimes don't have that level of grit. Right. So I'm like, grit, that's my competitive advantage. The fact that I've walked in all forms uh, of situations with people that are different, that is my competitive advantage. Being in New York and having had friends from like literally all walks of life, having been able to live in another country, come from a different type of socioeconomic background, like all of that is actually competitive advantage because what I have perspective. I
Yeah.
see things differently than most people do. So it started to actually reinforce that I shouldn't feel like an imposter. Like I should see that this different type of experience that I've had is actually my competitive advantage.
Man, I love that answer. I mean, obviously I'm an immigrant too. I should have applied to Brown University just because I'm brown. I just kidding. No, it's so crazy because everyone underestimates the international perspective, and that is something that I feel is definitely a competitive advantage. When I 2002, I backpacked for a month and a half, and it was the first time I was out of the U.S. Well, I was born in the Philippines, came here when I was 8, and then I never left. Right, and I went to backpacked, and I was like, oh crap, the world is so big and it just I flipped a switch. I went from being a loser surfer kid, just like didn't want to care, and I'm like, if I want to make something happen, like I can. It's like international gave me those lenses where I was able to just say, wow, there's more to life than just it is insane. So I love that you pointed that out as being a competitive advantage, and I'm sure there's going to be listeners that are going to be like, yeah, I could do this shit. Like they could really do this, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
and,
yeah.
I, and like how you said that. But let's go back to you know, you said it, complexity, right? Airlines are notorious for complexity with the margins. And what are you doing that you've learned from that in what you're currently doing now? Because you're doing a lot of awesome things for supply chain. You're helping other founders. You're not just you're. I've seen you on some calls, and I've seen you how you handle other human beings and founders that are probably were you walk that walk. So how is that guiding you through today's work of what you're doing for Blue Impact?
I lean in heavily on my experience that I had as an operator, and I think as a fund manager today at we started Blue Impact, we're a VC fund focused on supply chain logistics. I lean in heavily on my experience as an operator, right? Because I've I've seen many different types of businesses. Obviously, we saw the airline business. We saw the cargo side of the airline business. We saw the tourism side, and then with modern logistics, we saw the contract logistics, third party logistics, call it, side of the house with warehousing and technology, TMSs and WMSs, and so when you it's a very broad operational mind map that I have, right? And so what I started to see, and kind of what, coming back to the first question, kind of what excites me, it comes back to what this experience as an operator showed me, which is, well, the supply chain logistics space, exclude passenger for a little bit, just focus on the movement of goods. The players in the movement of goods space uh, is are mostly SMBs, especially trucking. 95% of trucking has SMBs that have, like, 10, 15 trucks, right? But that's the same for freight forwarders. Is the same thing for importers, exporters, like the beneficial cargo owners. It's for distributors, for retail companies. So the bulk of the supply chain are SMBs. And you know what? What we start to see is, like, they're using legacy technology, older technology. Some of them are still on paper and Excel, right? And
Google
so
Docs.
Google Docs now, right? And so I'm like, look, I think there's an opportunity in the digitalization of the supply chain and the logistics chain, right? And so I could either build a company, but instead of building, I was like, well, why don't I leverage this experience that I've had building and help founders in their journey, right? Because I've never been the type that, oh, I need to be on the front cover. I like to build, and I have to see the results of things that are built, right? That's ultimately what I like to see, and it's like, wow, that's where I really get my fulfillment, is seeing that company come to fruition and know that people's lives have been positively impacted because that company exists, right? And so I know it's like a two steps detached, right? But some people, I'm okay with that because I know the impact, right? And some people in the nonprofit world are, they need to see, okay, I took care of that child and I know who that child's name, right? And that's great, right? They're seeing it, right, like first degree. When you build operations like this, it's 2 or 3 degrees attached. But we know that we've saved people's lives by flying to destinations, or by bringing pharmaceuticals just in time because they needed those pharmaceuticals for the medical procedure, or so we brought that heart transplant and we saved that life. So those are the things that you do when you operate an airline. So you know that the benefits, and then obviously the job creation, all that. So I'm like, you know what? I feel like, even though I'm in a for-profit, high return focused market, which is the venture capital market, the effects of this is like it's like a nonprofit, but it could be even bigger than a nonprofit, right? Because you're helping in economic development. And in the case of supply chain logistics, you actually have another benefit, which is you bring optimization to supply chain logistics, which is cost reducing, which is great for the trucker, is great for the warehouse operator that you're reducing costs, but you're also reducing your carbon footprint in that decarbonization. In that optimization, you're decarbonizing. So it's actually the holy grail of operating. You're optimizing, reducing costs, and it's good for the planet, right? So that's why I named the VC Blue Impact, because we could impact the founders, we could possibly impact the planet, and we create this virtuous cycle of impact that feeds in itself. So that's really the call it the macro vision of why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's very tough. I can tell you right now that building a VC is actually probably the toughest thing I have done.
Wow.
Given everything else that I've built, but the reward is just massive. Being having founders tell me, it's like, Marlon, you were, because we're still not a big VC, we're smaller, we're writing smaller checks, but having founders tell me, Marlon, you're one of my smallest check, but you're my biggest impact VC. You helped me get to the other side. Like there's startups that I believe that maybe wouldn't have made it if it wasn't because of my advice, because of doors that I opened. So that's fulfilling. For me, that makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, you have that go-giver mentality from even from the first time we met. I could you're just so genuine about it and really truly helping. And I've seen you with other founders saying, what's your ask? Like in introductions, whether that's an introduction, whether that's help, like you really care. And that's what because people think with VC, oh man, they're just here to make money. And that's a tough environment to try to change that mentality or mindset on what a VC should be like, and especially in a hard, like you said, it was SMBs. It's hard to convince SMBs that you're going to save them money, because sometimes I always think that's BS, right? Like, but there's not it's hard, like that's the hardest part about our industry. What do you think, like your biggest challenge? I mean, seeing the tech side, seeing the a legacy old school mentality like trucking, and even I'm assuming it's the same thing with ocean and other international, like underdeveloped countries. Like, what is the, because you have investors everywhere, and that's what I love about it's international investors. What is the challenge? Like, what's that biggest challenge right now, and how do you think you're going to solve that?
So it is a challenge, right? When you look at the adoption of technology in supply chain logistics, it's low, right? And so you have to identify founders and technologies that have the ability to penetrate and help accelerate that digitalization. And now the moments that we're living are tailwinds, right? Because the shocks to the system actually get people out of the comfort zone. So it's like, how the mentality of like, oh, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And I think that's a lot of that mentality that we have in our industry. But things are broke, right? And so when you have a moving target on tariffs, when you have climate impacts that impact canals around the world, when you have geopolitics that make a trade lane that we saw that it was a viable trade lane no longer viable. When you see volumes shift from China to India to Latin America, for port closures because you have issues with labor, and so that's the world that we're living in, right? And so for SMBs and enterprises that are not creating systems that are more versatile, resilient, and add that layer of fast decision making, you're getting left behind, right? And so the mentality is changing in the industry because it has to. There's no alternative, right? And so that is why we I believe we're living in one of the best moments to in supply chain logistics digitalization, right? Because those macro tailwinds are we're those, and I say tailwinds for software, for technology, because obviously if you're operating and you're moving goods, those are it could be considered headwinds, right? Because you're like, oh man, I had a trailer here that was working, now it's not, so it's like, so you're getting those challenges, right? From a software perspective, an technology perspective, this is actually the best time to be selling to you, right? Because then you're like, wow, wait, that solution now helps me be able to pivot to a new route. It helps me, you know, think about optimizing my warehouse or bring this other new type of client because I'm getting more visibility on what's going on around the world, or so there's so for what I'm building here, which is an ecosystem of startups that are solving real problems in the supply chain, is actually very it's very positive, right? So, I mean, we can get into details on some examples, but that gives you a sense of where we see the opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's crazy because it's a tough one. We've seen a lot of like what'd you say, cemeteries of companies. I mean, especially in the tech boom where money was given away, right? Like and what did you think about that when they were just giving away money and spending it irresponsibly? And now that I mean, you were handling billions of dollars. Now you're in the millions, right? Like so, it's completely two different things. Are you more responsible with holding, other people's money than like a big investment? Because big investment banks, there's always a way for them to make that money up.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like
yeah,
for
yeah.
smaller investors that are investing in your idea, in your vision, how do you handle that stress of like, okay, this is real money, like
Yeah,
family offices, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
founders that have exited and
yeah.
they want to do good for they want to
Exactly.
help as well. Like,
I,
how
I,
do you handle that
I treat it
stress?
like it's my money, and I do have my money invested too. So I've
Yeah.
been, so I mean that gives you a level of responsibility, right? That's at like at another level, right? Because uh, it you have to perform. And for me, it's I love what I'm doing. I love the impact that I have with the founders, with what they're building, and so I see this as, I want to have a larger fund. I want to amplify this impact, right? And so I have to perform. If I'm not performing, if I'm not identifying great opportunities and really adding value, it's like, okay, well, I have to go figure out and do something else, and then and then everybody that's invested in the fund, they're not going to be happy with the results, right? And so, like, I don't see that as an alternative. Like, I have to identify great companies and really provide them like real value add and where I could make a difference. And so when you apply that to the investment strategy, right? It's like we've been investing in companies that, first of all, I understand what the problem is because I've either lived the problem or one of my investors, like yourself, like, have lived the problem as well. And so like I get, I get, you know, most of the backers of the fund come from supply chain logistics. And so I'm humble enough to know that I don't know everything. So when I'm looking at an opportunity, I like to bring it to one of my investors that has deeper knowledge in that vertical, be it freight forwarding, be it warehousing, multimodal trucking, distribution, advanced manufacturing. We haven't invested in that vertical yet, but we would if we have insights on how it operates because of the investors that have backed us, or we always look at it from that lens. Like we have to understand it well before I make a decision. So that's step one, is really making the decision. And two is like, can we add value? Is there can or is this just going to be an investment where it's just an investment, but we really can't help differentiate our help? And most of the VC's help is in introducing other capital, which is great. They can introduce other capital. They can help you work on your deck for the next capital raise, and that's great. We do that too, but it's kind of a commodity, right? It's like it's what VCs do. It's like they could open doors with other investors. They could help you kind of like position your story for the next round, but it's harder for them to put on their operating boots and help that founder find uh, a strategic client or partner that could open doors for them and help them bring revenues, right? Or think about their go-to-market in this specific industry of supply chain and logistics and be able to help tweak that go-to-market, right? So that's really where we lean on is like, can we help there, right? And and because that also helps mitigate our risk, right? When we made the investment, and then it's like we're able to bring a client, or we open some door that really kind of took this round. So that helps us mitigate the risk of the class of investment that we're doing, right? So so that is I would say that's what helps me sleep at night because I know that we're making a difference. And when you look at the companies that we backed, some of them are growing triple digits, 100% growth year over year, and sometimes 200% growth year over year. You look at the clients that they have, the traction that they're getting. Some of them are already reaching profitability, and they're still at the seed stage. Right? It's like so when you
Wow.
start to look at some of these financial metrics, you're like, oh wow, we're actually we're doing good. We're doing good. And I had a recent investor. She's a fund of fund investor that looks at many VCs. So they're looking at all a bunch of VCs. They select the best VCs that they find after looking at hundreds of them, right? It's kind of like what we do with founders. We look at
Yeah.
hundreds of founders and we select the best ones. There's these fund of funds that look at a whole bunch of VCs and select the best ones. And she's like, hey, Marlon, you have something different going on here, right? This differentiated, and I believe that this differentiator that you have, like focusing on having on having investors from the industry that could help you see things differently and could open doors, and that could really help you generate uh, another level of returns that these other VCs that I'm looking at don't have. So that gives me comfort, right? That gives me comfort that we're on the right path. That when you look at the companies that we backed, they're doing amazing things, solving real problems, getting real growth, and so that's what gives me the comfort to continue doing what I'm doing, right? Because I believe that we're doing things the right way.
That's awesome. I mean, because like, so going back to these founders, like, what's your biggest advice for a founder that's trying to raise capital or try to find market fit, or like what's going to increase their chance of being successful, especially in supply chain? And I'm gonna bring up what you told me when we had first met, and I told you I own a trucking company. But wait a minute, I also do brokerage, right? And you're like, yeah, that's what you should be doing. Don't own assets. So you gave me a good piece of advice, but I didn't take it because I'm still running assets. I'm just trying to figure out that market. And yeah, so what is like what's going to increase the chance of being successful in the tech startup world and supply chain, and also like what's the best piece of advice you could give these founders?
The best piece of advice is really understanding the problem set and who you're selling to, right? And so sometimes founders think they've identified a problem, but they haven't tested that problem with the target clients and see if they see the same problem that they've identified and they're willing to pay for the solution that solves that problem, right? So that is a big step from identifying the problem and do I have the right solution that this client's going to pay for to solve that problem, right? And so that equation right there is what really needs to they need to figure out. And it's like, is this solution enough that I'm going to get enough traction, enough clients paying me for this solution that I've brought to that problem that you have? So being client centric is essential. Like is so, and coming from the industry, so you could understand. So that's one of the things that we prefer. And for the most part, we've invested in founders that come from the industry. They kind of live the problem, and then they
Founder
just
market fit. Yeah,
exactly. So we're like, we really like that, right? Because uh, when outsiders come, they don't really understand. Sometimes maybe they'll make it, but it's going to cost them a lot more money to make it because they're like it's like when it's like you're driving and you're trying to change your wheels while you're driving, right? It's like, but if you've already driven before, right, and you don't need to make those massive pivots, right? You're gonna have to make adjustments, but it's not like you go from like building a solution for trucking to like all of a sudden it's like, oh no, no, that's actually that solution that I built for trucking is now going to be a solution um, for banks, and those are the types of pivots that some of the founders do that don't come from the industry, right? Because I know this technology is awesome. I could actually use it for another industry, and it's like, whoa, that is like so. I
Like they're not in love with the problem. They're just in
exactly.
love with their solution.
Exactly. So when people have lived the problem, I think it makes it a lot more. It gives them the grit to really find a way to make it work, and go after that client and figure out how can do they see it the way I see it? Do I need to make adjustments? Do I get to right price point? And they're just like more in love with that problem solution set, and I think that makes a massive difference.
So what makes you walk away from deals?
Uh, I I I would have to say that it's ego is a big one. If I see a lot
Ooh.
of ego from a founder, like, oh, it's because I mean, there's a balance of being confident of what you're doing and come across as a know-it-all. And if they come across as a know-it-all, I don't need help. It's like, then what am I here for? You can find other investors that'll back you. You don't need my help. They're not going to leverage what I bring to the table. And again, coming back to how we invest, we want to be, even though we're not writing big checks right now, I want to help somehow, right? And if you have a large ego, how am I going to help you, right? And also, it's also a red flag for me. It's like, well, are you even going to listen to the employees that you hire with
Ooh.
that much of an ego, right? So it's like to me, it's just like, and obviously we see some founders out there that have inflated egos, and maybe they got inflated over time. Maybe they weren't that way when they got started, but it's a it's a huge red flag for me. So and I think it's for a lot of investors that come from an operating background. I think it would be a red flag for them as well.
So what's it two top things that you're like, wow, okay, this is the person that I want to invest in. Top
Uh,
two.
Top two, uh, I would have to say it's somebody that has lived the problem. They've lived the problem. They've kind of felt the problem, and it's enough of a pain that they're like, you know what, I'm going to leave my comfort zone and go and build a solution for this problem. And two is, well, how are you now? Uh, what solution are you creating for that problem? How have you thought about it, right? And understanding the nuts and bolts of how they're thinking about the solution, or just already have an actual prototype. We usually invest in companies that already have a solution that they're utilizing for clients. So we're not coming in at the just conceptual stage. We're coming in usually at a moment where they have a couple of clients, they have some minimal traction, so we're able to see kind of how they created that solution. And so because we're operators, right? We're like, okay, we could put ourselves in the shoes of the client or the operator and be like, okay, yeah. And we're like, okay, that that solution makes sense. I would buy it, right? Or talk to a client of theirs and be like, yeah, the client's excited about that solution, right? So I would say it's those two things: is the founder, market and product fit, and then the solution is effectively, has it been built properly to be able to go to that market, and does it have enough, uh, and sometimes part of the secret sauce is also finding if if they have a moat, right? Like, can they create a competitive moat, or is this just too easy to replicate by a whole bunch of other founders, and all of a sudden you're going to have like hundreds of founders building that same thing, right? And so that's another thing that we're cautious
Like
is
building a bus system, right? That would be a moat.
well, yeah. That's a moat, right? Obviously, it's capital
Well,
intensive, but but there's
yeah.
different ways. There's different ways to identify technological moats.
Wow, that's, I mean, it's so cool. I mean, you've done so much, and it seems like you just keep getting success after success after success. I want to talk about some, like, name your number one failure that you learned from, because I want people to know, like, okay, what hurt you the most? What did you fear the most? And what you hated the most? Those two questions, because it looks great. Everyone is an expert of some sort. If you're looking at their LinkedIn, they're experts, and they're, and they have, but and everything goes well. Everything's a highlight reel. But for someone reading your profile, they're like, holy moly. But I want them to know, what is Marlon afraid of, and what was your biggest failure?
So failure is part of the equation of success, right? Like you have to be comfortable with failing, and not only comfortable, you have to relish in failures because they're your biggest lessons in life, right? And so as long as the failure doesn't wipe you out, it's probably a blessing, right? It's you just have to have that mindset of looking at that failure as a blessing, right? So I've had failures as an operator, I've had failures as an investor, right? And I always lean into those failures and tweak and adjust so that, I've learned from them and it makes me a better investor, a better operator because of it, right? So uh, one of them is is modern logistics, for example. I co-founded the company, but I we had trust with the other co-founder, and we just didn't have all the documentation tidied up, right? And so, meaning the shareholding structure was kind of things were a little loose, and I was a smaller co-founder, and ultimately that came to again certain people change over time, egos inflate, and and because you don't have things documented properly, you could end up with a short end of the stick, right? So that's something that I learned from. Huge lesson. Today we document everything, negotiate everything in
Documentation.
documents, everything as much as I have friends, and it's like, no, yes, we're friends, but things are going to be very black and white when we're getting into contractual agreements. And so that's a huge, especially as an investor, right? That is a massive lesson. And I also use that to help founders, that are, they're building their friends, and they go and they build. And it's like, well, how does a cap table look like? Okay, how much do you have? How much does he have? Okay, is there a rationale around that? You have to understand, what, and you have to have those tough conversations early on, because it's all fine and dandy when things are at the beginning, but when things start to do well, all of a sudden it's like, well, if expectations weren't properly managed, all of a sudden you could have issues at the management level, at the founder level. So that's a huge lesson that
Wow.
it permeates everything that I do today, because I like to say there's a what's the definition of happiness? It's your expectation versus your reality. If your reality is reaching that expectation, you're happy, right? And so, but if your expectations here and your reality is here, you're going to be an unhappy person, regardless of where that expectation is, right? And so, having that meeting of expectations when a company is getting started is the best formula for founders, right? As they, because that expectation has been properly managed from the get-go. So anyway, that gives you an example of how that experience that I had now permeates into what I do, and the way the advice that I also give founders, right?
Yeah.
From that lesson learned.
And what's your biggest fear?
Uh, my biggest fear is not being able to deliver the returns. I like I said, I treat my investments as it's my capital and it's my reputation. And if I'm not delivering the results, I'm it's like for me it's like game over. It's like I cannot happen. So even though
Yeah.
we're investing in early stage, call it high risk reward uh space, I don't see it as an alternative. I don't see failure as an alternative because for me that would be like the worst thing that could happen. Right?
Yeah.
And it's like I'm invested way too much to have things fail at this stage. And so how we how we how we calculate that, because we there's a calculus around it, right? And so when you look at any fund out there, right? Those that are properly structured that are investing early stage now, properly structured that are right. It's like
Yeah.
there's a calculus in there, right? And my calculus is like there's not all companies need to survive. That's in the calculus. Like I assume that there's going to be a whole bunch of companies that are going to be zero. That hasn't been the case. Okay, like we've invested over
Yeah.
20 companies and we hasn't been the case, but we have to put that in the calculus of the fund math, right? And we could still deliver the high returns that we promise our investors, even with that happening, right? So I guess a scenario that scares me is like, whoa, how about that percentage a lot higher? But fortunately, you know, we've uh, you know, we've been on the opposite end of that. Like we have like
No,
a lot more success than those failures.
I mean, your whole entire career, you played with a 1 billion plus of money. So
Yeah.
it's, I know that's definitely a big fear that can arise in my situation. I'm like, gosh, I'm playing with this money.
Yeah.
Um, and that's crazy. So, I mean, we're coming to time here, and I wanted to ask you, and thank you so much for spending an hour with me and hanging out. But I want to leave with one thing is, what do you think of all of your accomplishments, and what do you want to be known for if you were to be gone tomorrow?
Have left a legacy of impact. I want people that I've worked with, be it founders or investors in my fund or people that I've touched to have them say, it's like, Marlon made a difference. Marlon made a difference in what I'm doing. And that's the legacy I'd like to leave, right? We all obviously we leave this earth without any with what we came with, which is nothing, right?
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that you could really ask for is having impacted people's lives. Like obviously I have a couple of boys and them too. I want to impact their lives and have them lead a a righteous path, doing the right thing. And so that's what I want. Those are the light. Those are the those. That's what I want to influence. Right? Is being able to make that positive impact in everybody that I touch.
I love that because a lot of founders that talk about impact and difference and legacy, if that's in their vocabulary, that's the go giver mentality. Those are the founders I'm attracted to, and I'm sure that's why the vibes put us together. And I truly appreciate you being on this chat with me today. So thanks, Marlon. I'm gonna sign off now, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Tristan. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely.